I'm very honored to be here, and I will give you an overview what Saint-Gobain we are doing what comes to the carbon neutrality and our product stewardship, as well as I will talk a bit about the regulation coming in place in Finland and in Nordics, and I see also in many other countries. But let's start, and feel free to make any questions, and I will come online also afterwards. So if there are any questions later, but let's see. Okay, so about Saint-Gobain quickly. So we are a global company, but we are also very local in a sense that, for example, in Finland, all the materials we sell in tons, 98% of them are produced in Finland. And actually, we export many products from Finland to Estonia. So actually, Estonia and the Baltic countries, they are along with us what comes to the sustainability and the product stewardship. But here you see in the upper corner the very well-known construction brands we are dealing with, and there are many other brands in the Saint-Gobain as well. And what is our topic and vision and mission what comes to the sustainability? So we talk about the comfort of the individual in the built environment. So we spend 90% approximately in the built environment in buildings. So they have an impact on our well-being. And the other side of the coin is sustainability, where we have a global challenges, how to mitigate the climate change, what do we do with the circular economy, how do we use the resources. And combining these, we believe that we can create well-being now and today in the future. And Saint-Gobain, we are the stock exchange company, so we have a pretty many commitments what comes to sustainability, and we have actually investors and owners who are pushing us for delivering the results what comes to the sustainability and reaching the carbon neutral built environment. And just to mention, the Green Building Council and the World Green Building Council, it's a strategic partner for Saint-Gobain. And if there are 70 Green Building Councils locally, so Saint-Gobain is a member of 40 of them. And I guess that the built environment, it's a pretty big part of the problem what comes to the climate and our challenges, but it's happily also a big part of the solution. So these figures here, you see energy emissions, you see raw materials and waste. That is the global picture of what is the impact of the built environment. But let's not stick too deep into this. But the big thing here is that we still need to build a lot in the future, the urbanization and anything infrastructure. So we have to build a lot, but we have to do that with less carbon and less resources. Yeah. And how do we see this then at the end of the day? So these three topics are those topics that I work daily with. So carbon and climate, resources and circularity, health and well-being. And these topics, they all go hand in hand. Circular economy, recycling, using alternative or renewable raw materials, that's a very concrete mean to reduce the carbon footprint of our products. And of course, there are many things. We are industrial actors, so energy efficiency, we can never forget that. And if we come to the health and well-being, if we talk about the hazardous substances now and in the future, and if we talk about those in the past, so asbestos, it used to be a really good construction material in the past, but it's not anymore. But telling that like the products or combinations of the products without hazardous substances, they are much more easy to recycle at the end of their life cycle. But what is the big thing here? There are many documentation, there's many topics, is that the need for the information and the need for transparency, it grows in the huge speed. The data, information, it has to be available and it has to be of high quality. And just few examples here about the circularity, recycling, what we do. I will focus more on the carbon today. So what comes to the glass wool, for example, in what we produce in Finland in 2 plants. So it contains 60 to 80% of recycled glass. And we are the biggest user of recycled glass in Finland. And we are also creating all the time new streams for the recycled glass. And when we talk about the gypsum boards, Kyprock, so the Kyprock board, it contains approximately 20% of recycled gypsum. And we could increase the amount up to 30 now. But then to go over 30, it requires investment in our Kirkkonummi plant. But I'm pretty sure we have that already planned on our carbon and sustainability roadmap. And when we talk about the Weber and the industrial mortars, so there we are very active. We are looking for alternatives for the aggregates and the binders. We are looking alternatives for sand, and we are trying to find replacing combinations for the binders. There are many cementitious products we do, and actually cement has a pretty big impact when it comes to the CO2. So we need to find a low carbon solutions for cements. But just to tell here like that the cement, it's many times it's like demonized because it has a big CO2 emissions, but I have been talking recently with pretty many suppliers of ours. So there's a huge work going on what comes to the cement suppliers, and I'm pretty sure that within 5 years, the 30% emission reduction is possible. And talking about the carbon, of course, we have to remember that there's the bigger picture of the corporate social responsibility and sustainability behind here. So we talk about the equality, many other things, local value creation. But today we focus on climate change and circular economy mainly. And as a group, Saint-Gobain is committed to carbon neutrality in 2050. In Finland and in Nordics, we are heading for 2035. That means that in Finland, we are aiming to be carbon neutral at the same time as Finland as a nation wants to be. And it's not only carbon, there are many other linked objectives we have. So of course, it's a process waste. We have to increase the amount of alternative raw materials. Packaging is something we focus on. And what comes to the plastic, we have a target to have 30% of the recycled content in our plastic packaging by 2030. And what I learned recently, so actually in Finland, we should be able to have in the film plastics already pretty easily the 30% recycled content. And it should not be even anymore that much expensive as it used to be earlier. And I'm not going deep into the greenhouse gas protocol, but it's the standard for calculating the organization total carbon footprint. And what comes to Saint-Gobain Group objectives with the carbon neutrality, so our objective is verified and approved by the Science-Based Targets framework. And what we talk when we talk about the total carbon, we have the direct emissions, and then we have the value chain. The value chain is the biggest part actually of our total emission. This is an example of Saint-Gobain Finland total CO2 emissions in 2019. So you see that the direct emissions, they are approximately 20%, and the scope 3, that's 78, almost 80%. And underneath the green lamp, that reminds me that we are using renewable energy, renewable electricity in the whole Nordics, and I think that we are using that also in the Baltics. So that makes it happen that our scope 2 emissions are zero. But if you look to scope 3, all those categories we have calculated into our total emissions. So when we talk about, or many industries are talking that we are carbon neutral, many times the discussion goes only on the scope 1 and scope 2. And the value chain emissions, they are hidden somewhere behind, but that's actually where the major part is. And these figures here, it's 145, 150. kiloton. So that is the 2019 figure. We have already calculated 2020 and we have already calculated almost 21. And here you can see how interesting actually this total CO2 emissions are when you split them into more detailed data. So you can see here that the gypsum and isover businesses, they are more energy intensive than, for example, the Weber, the industrial motors business. So in Weber business, the raw materials, they are really the majority of the CO2 impact. And that is actually very, very eye-opening to dig deeper into these figures, because we have to first know how much emissions we create, then we have to know where is the biggest impact, and then we can start acting. And of course, we have to prioritize here. So there's no sense to start with the smallest thing first, but we have to prioritize. And we have been deciding that we prioritize on the raw materials, packaging, and transportation in the first instance. Of course, later on, we have to focus on many, many, many other things. And this is like the, let's say, the first roadmap, carbon roadmap we created last spring. And there are many things we are planning to do, and somehow we are also pretty realistic with this. So you can see that there's still the 40 kilotons at the end of the day in 2035. We don't know yet how we are going to neutralize those emissions, and I'm pretty sure nobody else knows either, because the industry the industry evolves. And anyway, if we do something, our competitors are doing very good work to reduce the emissions. The traffic, the energy industry, all the other industries are working as well. So I see here somehow like the snowball effect, that we go few years further, so the speed, it will increase and many things will happen. And then we will see how much will be there left in 2035. And of course, this roadmap is evolving. We will learn something in the meantime. We will succeed in something. And it's very, very interesting to see what will happen in 5, 10, 15 years. And these are the topics we have identified, how we are aiming to reach the net zero carbon. It goes by our product design, R&D, research and development, and how light are our materials, what are the raw materials we have there. Can our products be recycled or utilized at the end of their life cycle? That's important work we need to do. And as I mentioned, energy efficiency, we have to look at all the time. We cannot forget that. And switching our processes, for example, to electricity. I'm sure we have it there on our carbon roadmap somewhere after 2030. And as an example, so we have the Kyprock plant in Norway, in Fredrikstad. So it has been, there's a renovation going on in the plant, and at the same time, this plant, it will be turned into the electricity, and it will be the first net zero gypsum board plant, most probably in the whole world. And of course, the collaboration with our suppliers, our customers, and our logistic partners, that's of extreme importance in this work. And when we talk about the carbon removals, before any compensation, we will have there the new technology. Is it a carbon capture? Is it something else? Carbon storage. But the compensation is really the last mile for us in this path to reach the net zero carbon. And somehow to say it, that we are not trying to reach the carbon neutrality just because we want to do that, just because our owners are requesting for that, but it's actually linked to our role in the construction value chain. Our role is to help our customers and stakeholders to reach their own climate objectives, and to help the whole society to reach the carbon neutral built environment. And what we do on our organization, any actions, any things we do to reduce our total emissions, so they are reflected directly on our products' environmental product declarations. so-called life cycle environmental and climate footprint. So if we change raw materials, so we can lower the carbon footprint of our products. And as you saw, there was a total CO2, and then I spoke about the EPDs. So EPDs is somehow the proof and the fact of the work we do in decarbonizing our own operations and helping our customers to decarbonize. We have a pretty many EPDs, over 1,500 in the whole world. In Nordics, we have over 400 EPDs, and actually we measured the coverage of our turnover that is covered by the EPDs in this autumn, and actually we are reaching pretty high there. And I know there are many EPDs that are done also in Lithuania for the Weber, in Baltics, and actually we are preparing the EPDs on demand for few products that we are exporting to Estonia and the Baltics. And what is important here, if we talk about the EPDs, it's not only carbon footprint that can be found there. There are many other interesting topics as well. But important is that the EPDs are done according to the 15804 standard. It has been updated recently, and from the next year, only the A2 versions can be published. EPDs needs to be third-party verified. They need to be published on the EPD operator platform, and they should have the whole life cycle in them. And especially the A2 is pushing for this. There are certain materials that can still do the EPD only from the cradle to plant gate scenario. And what is important when you see different EPDs now, so check the end of the life. What is the scenario? There are some EPDs already stating that some materials can be recycled 100% from the old building and put into the new building. So I say that this is something that will evolve, because it's not true that you can recycle something as a 100%. So that is something we have to really keep eye on and understand more. And of course, many materials will be recycled, but still you need to base your EPDs on the facts. And what is the role of the EPDs? You remember there was this 39% of CO2 emissions that the built environment causes. Of course, there's the operation phase of the buildings where the heating, cooling, all the energy that is used. So it's still a big part of the whole life cycle emissions of the buildings. And here it's important to remember that the structural energy efficiency, it's still important. Whatever renewable CO2-free energy we will get in the future, there's no sense to use more than you need of any kind of emission-free energy. And the rest, there's 28%, there's 11%. So 11% is this kind of embodied carbon that is brought with the products and the construction process into the building in the beginning of its life cycle. And in the upper corner, you see there are two publications, two reports in Finnish. Sorry, but you can find them on the Green Building Council Finland website. So that's a very interesting project called Building Life. It aims to reduce the embodied carbon in the buildings from 2017 to 2030 by 40%. And we are a very active partner in that project as well. But take a look to those, they are very interesting. And of course, we are entering to discuss about the carbon neutral buildings. I will talk about a bit about the regulation that will come. So regulation is something that it puts the big picture in place. But then if we talk about very ambitious building owners, for example, so they are doing much more ambitious work at the end of the day, not following only the regulation. And then we go there, that how do we have the carbon neutral buildings over the whole life cycle? Sorry, I have the title in Finnish, but it tells like that we are aiming to go for more developed CO2 emissions. So we have EPDs, and we have made with the one-click LCA different studies how the structure and the building level it compares, and what kind of CO2 emissions do Saint-Gobain solutions have versus alternative materials and alternative solutions. And actually, we have been very happily surprised many times that in most cases, Saint-Gobain solutions are the low carbon options. We are even the lowest what come to the carbon emissions. And when we made this study, of course, there are bio-based materials. We cannot have all those benefits there are. But what I can proudly say, that our isover glass wall, it has nothing to shame over the cellulose insulation, for example. The difference in the emissions is really marginal. And last summer, when we think about this, that okay, those studies, they were pretty big. They were a bit expensive as well. So I hired 3 students to make us some more developed data. These 3 students, they have been calculating using the one-click LCA tool, and by Excel, they have calculated 985 different structures that Saint-Gobain can offer. And we have now this huge data. We have the CO2 emissions in kilos per square meter over the 50 years life cycle of almost 1,000 structures. And now we have made the first step. We have this laskentapalvelut.fi, calculation-tools.fi service. So we have there now the isover external walls. You can see the whole structure. You can see what are the components there, what is the U value, for example, and now you can see there also the global warming potential, the CO2 emissions over the life cycle per square meter. Next will be the gypsum, the partition walls, and step by step we will increase this data in this calculation tools.fi. And a few words about the carbon regulation to come. So we tried to get the Matti Kuittinen to speak in this event as well, but unfortunately Matti is now, I assume, in Glasgow in the COP meeting. And I just discussed with him recently, and he told that he was actually in Estonia a few weeks ago to present where we are going in Finland what comes to the low carbon regulation in buildings. But I took here a Nordic point of view to explain this more. So I'm part of this Nordic working group, Nordic Climate Forum for Construction. We started the work in 2019. There's academia, authorities, industry, and local green building councils. And the discussion goes over what can be harmonized, what can be stolen with the bride, what can be copied over here, because we are all talking about the more or less similar things, but there are also some differences. And this work is going on. And there was recently, a few weeks ago, I guess I have my presentation, I have stolen the slide from this last climate forum where these things were discussed. But here you see how the development is going on in the Nordic countries. So we have more or less same kind of ambitious targets as a nations to become carbon neutral. And in Sweden, they will have the climate declaration in place already starting from next year. In Finland, we have the climate declaration under preparation now, and it should be in place most probably in 2024. And now the data has been gathered also for the limit values. What could be the limit values for the different kind of building types? And this work goes on, and it's estimated that we should have these limit values before 2025. We had now this climate declaration methodology. It was in public hearing. Many comments have been given how to make the system work better and what kind of changes should be done there. So it's very hard to say that when we will have it actually in place, because so much comments were given on this documentation. And so far, this Nordic group, so there has been the collaboration with the national emission database between Sweden and Finland. So there is a very nice CO2 data.fi database in internet, so it's also in English. So take a look and check, but that's a generic data that the Ministry of Environment wanted to provide for users who are calculating the whole building life cycle. And many other discussions are going there, and many studies has been over the Nordic countries. And here you can see that what is actually the things going on and coming in different Nordic countries. So in Denmark, they already put the limit values. In Finland, we are aiming to have the limit values and the climate declaration. It's under development, and as I told, the 2025 will be the date when we have all this in place. There is no requirement for the specific LCA tool, and that actually makes sense. No public authority can push for any commercial tool, but it's rather the methodology that needs to be validated and given to the industry. And in Finland, we will have like 2 stages of climate declaration when you have to calculate the whole building life cycle. So it's connected to the building permission, and then you have to recalculate it before the building is taken in use. So meaning this completion. And it actually, there are some things that I would like to change. There should be the public register on this data that is provided. And anyway, the verification, that's a big topic as well, because I see it will be big challenge. The whole industry is somehow learning something new, and how can the authorities, everybody needs the competence or to calculate or to interpret these results. So verification and training, that's something very important. As I mentioned about the EPDs, so there is the new standard, updated standard coming, the A2 version. So the Finnish calculation method, it lies on this A2, where you have also the biogenic carbon in the calculation and also the land use emissions, so-called LULUC emissions are there. And I see here a big problem because we don't have that many new EPDs yet. And the A1 EPDs can be still produced and published until the end of June next year, and they are valid for 5 years. So from 2022, there will be still old kind of EPDs that are valid until 27. So I'm sure that we need a guidance. We need to have the guidance on interpretation, how to deal with 2 different kind of versions of the CO2 data in the future. But that's something that it's then over the ministry to think and to help the industry to implement this climate declaration. And the life cycle, it is more or less 50 years, and a lot of discussion has been going on that as well. But of course, you can calculate also on the actually planned life cycle on the buildings. And I mentioned this database and the EPDs. So ministry provided the whole industry a generic database. The database, it's based on the actual data. We have been working in tight collaboration with the Syke and the ministry who were preparing this database. So we have totaled what is the actual emission level of our products and the many other industries and many other construction products. And then they have made the generic value, the average for the Finnish market. And then there's a conservative value that is having the factor of 20% extra to have this conservative factor. So it means that if you don't use specific EPD-based data and you don't know what products you are going to use in your building product, so you should use the conservative values in the first calculations. Of course, later on, you know what materials were used, and then you can actually make a more specific calculation. And one topic is also that we have been discussing a lot in different forums is that if you have the certain figure related to the building permission, and then something changed over the way when the building, until the building is completed. And if you go over the limit there, what happens? Will there be some sanctions? I doubt nobody will demolish the building because of this, but there are still pretty many questions that we need to solve. And here you see that actually in Finland we are taking more scenarios in this calculation. It goes over the whole life cycle, and Denmark is almost as ambitious as Finland. In Sweden, they have now only the A1, A3, so from the cradle to the factory gate, but I'm sure all the other countries, they will go over and take more life cycle scenarios into the calculation. And included building parts. So Finland and Denmark are leading the way here, that we have much more building parts included in the calculations. And a lot of discussion has been in Finland about this, that what is underground. So the first proposal was that you should not take what is the cellars, the garage that is underground, or some foundations of the building into the calculation, but the common opinion is that it's somehow misleading, that of course you need to take everything into account. And talking with some big building owners, so they tell that, okay, if this climate declaration requires only some part, not the underground structure, so they will anyway calculate the total building with the underground structures as well. And then, so it's not only about the footprint, it's also about the handprint, and that is something that is included in the Finnish methodology of calculation, that what is the handprint. So what are the benefits that the building can offer when it's built, and that would not take place if the building was not built. So there are the carbon storages. Is it the wooden construction? Is it some new technology, something else? There's a carbonization. And of course, if the renewable energy is produced on plot, on site, so that can be calculated as well. And any benefit that comes over with the circular economy, that can be put into the handprint. And these are pretty new slides. So it was actually at the end of September, this last Nordic Climate Forum. So Matti was presenting some first ideas that how to set the limits for buildings. It's not that easy and straightforward, but there can be some thinking related to the national climate plans, energy mix, or climate conditions. And it goes from the big picture to the smaller picture. And there can be different values. There's a reference value, limit value, and the target value. And there's an example about this Danish limits. So I see that first you put the limit value somewhere, and over the years it will be anyway lowered by the years, and to get more ambitions then at the end of the day to really reach net zero carbon built environment. And there has been a nice study made by One Click LCA over the different CO2 footprints in different building types. And this has been now studied, and nothing has been yet decided. So what was written very big somewhere in this Matti's presentation, that these are just the first thoughts. These are nothing that actually the authority or the ministry is proposing now. But defining the values, so there are questions. Where do we get the data? Which parts of the building will be included? And where do the scenarios come from? And what life cycle stages should be included? Is it all, or is it something that you have to narrow the focus and put some limits somewhere? And this is the example of the Danish limit. You see it's all for the new buildings over 1,000 square meters. So now you have this 12 kilos of CO2 per square meter in a year. And then there's this like the voluntary CO2 class that is still lower. But you see here that actually the limit value, it goes over the years and it gets smaller and smaller. It will be interesting to see the results, that how quickly Denmark could get to reach that 7.5 kilos of CO2 per square meter in a year. And this is what I mentioned. So it's based on this one-click LCA report, and these are just like the first ideas. But it's interesting to see that how different buildings could have a different limit values. And what is important here also, that now we are not talking about the small one-family homes yet, or neither any summer cottages, but of course that can be one day the question. And okay, so but from those limit values, I really like this idea and the world we are going. So we should like really think about the carbon budget. Is it the global carbon budget, or is it the country carbon budget, or is it the city or some whole built environment carbon budget? And what will be the carbon budget for individual buildings, and how will the world change in the future? So I know that there are ambition building owners and contractors. So I guess that if now we are talking a lot about the cost optimization, so I'm pretty sure the CO2 optimization will come into the picture as well. And whatever is there, calculations, data, setting the limits. So digitalization has to be there as well. We can't handle all that data without having the proper tools. And something to take away, it's really big challenges we are facing. And what I would like to say, that nobody can do this alone. It's not Saint-Gobain, it's not the whole building industry, it's not all the industries alone or together or whatever, but the collaboration is the key. This is just an example of different companies and different parties, networks, where we have been discussing our climate objectives and how thinking about how can we collaborate together. Our customers, Kanska, they are pushing us, and Ilmarin and Taaleri, big building owners, they are pushing the main contractors. But anyway, we have to solve this in collaboration. And just to close up, it's not only the carbon. Even if we talk about carbon and circularity a lot, still the built environment, so it's very regulated industry, and we should not go into the sub-optimization. We need to keep the health, safety, euros, the performance, the long time durability, and the functionality of the buildings in our minds, and not to go sub-optimizing only by carbon or by circularity. It's a big picture where there are many things that needs to be fitting together. And when we talk about the different materials, so all materials are needed. It's a wood, steel, concrete, everything. We still need to build a lot, and we all need to have the low carbon as a competitive advantage for the future. And then a short commercial here. This event, it will be in Finnish, but it will be virtual FutureCon on 18th of November. So please register and come to listen. It will be very interesting. And this is actually the, how to say, pre-party, pre-event for the next spring big face-to-face Saint-Gobain FutureCon event we will organize in Helsinki. And the last but not the least, so this relates also to sustainability and the local value creation. The Louis XIV in Versailles, in the Mirror Hall, he needed to have the mirrors there, but he didn't want to buy them from Venice, Italy. So a company needed to be established to produce these mirrors, and the company was established in the small village called Saint-Gobain, and that is somewhere 370 years ago already. And that was, the urban legend tells that was our first delivery ever. So, but thank you. There were many things, and I speak a lot. And of course, this presentation will be shared with you, but this was what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Can you stay for a few minutes, please? I will do short translation in Estonia for the presentation you did, and maybe there will be some questions also. Ma kirjutasin enda jaoks üles siit mõned punktid, et Saint-Gobain kontsern on maailmas 20. kohal jätkusuutlikkuse edetabelis. Ja Saint-Gobain on lubanud 2050 siis olla CO2 neutraalne ja 2035 on siis võetud Põhjamaades eesmärgiks olla juba CO2 neutraalsed, need Saint-Gobaini ettevõtted siis. Ja 2000, nüüd Anne presenteeris seda Soome CO2 emissiooni ikkagi, et kui nüüd 2035 jäi sinna 40 tonni CO2 veel ülesse, mis tuleb ära lahendada, siis see on nagu antud hetkel selline stsenaarium, millele tõenäoliselt aeg annab siis omad lahendused, et antud hetkel suudeti siis arvutuslikult niivõrd alla minna, et siiski 40 tonni jääb, aga selge on see, et see proovitakse ka siis ära murda ja Anne tõi ühe lahendusena või ühe näitena Küprok Norra tehase Norras, kus siis hetkel käimasolev remont viib ta maailmas esimeseks CO2 neutraalseks tootmiseks, kipsplaadi tootja tehaseks siis. Ja Anne mainis ka Vandklik LCA-ga tehtud uuringuid, kus siis suvel 3 üliõpilast seda teostasid ja arvutati läbi ligi 1000 konstruktsiooni, mis on tüüpsed lahendused Saint-Gobaini materjalidega ja millele siis suudetakse anda tegelikult täna väärtused, mida see lahendus, kuivõrd koormav ta siis on keskkonnale 50 aasta jooksul, palju ta toodab CO2 1 ruutmeetri kohta. Et selles suhtes ma võin öelda, et meie kasutame neid samasid lahendusi tegelikult siin Eestis ka, nii et me proovime kasutada neid andmeid, mida Soome üliõpilased selle Vandklik LCA programmiga välja arvutasid ja proovime neid tuua ka teieni. Ma tean, et järgmine esineja Indrek Snickeril, seal on ka üks näide sellest juba olemas. Ja minu teada... ja siis Anne jagas veel tegelikult siin lihtsalt info mõttes olid need, kuidas toimuvad siis Põhjamaadel üleminekud või kuidas toimub see valmistumine ehitussektoris CO2 neutraalsuse saavutamiseks siis kas erinevate väärtustega, mis siis antakse ehitistele või olid seal mitmed stsenaariumid, et see ettekanne, et kõik ettekanded tulevad ju jagamisele ja ma praegusel hetkel enda jaoks läbikäidud punktid või märgitud punktid käisin läbi, et kas on äkki küsimusi saalist Annele? Okay, Anne, I will ask one question then. In the very beginning there was wool-to-loop project mentioned. Can you tell a little bit more about this? Because this is a long story, but you didn't mention it so much, but please, can you a little bit more explain this?
Yes. Yeah. Wool-to-loop, it's an EU-funded innovation project that I'm actually happy to be the project manager. And the project, it's 42 months, 6.7 million euros budget. And the aim of the project with our 14 partners from 9 countries in Europe is to turn the mineral wool, glass wool and stone wool out of the landfill. It's altogether 2.5 million tons that is landfilled in EU only of glass wool and stone wool. And as we go back to the history, so the pyramids, they were not built by the Asterix and Obelix and the slaves, but they were actually, the story tells that they were actually built by molding this kind of geopolymer concrete that was made with the volcanic ashes at that time. And this geopolymer, that is something that can be made by the ashes, slags, glaze, and also by the mineral wool. Mineral wool is a really good raw material for the geopolymer, and the geopolymer can replace different kind of cementitious binders. And in this project, we are aiming to turn the mineral wool into the binder, geopolymer binder, and we aim to replace Portland cement in certain construction products. For example, the Weber demonstration we will pilot pretty soon in the large scale some dry mixed concrete, where we will have some mineral wool in there. And of course, in our world now, when we are in the project, so some countries have been working already with the demolition wool, but in Finland, for example, we are now testing with the isover process waste that will be processed. And there are many companies, so it's Saint-Gobain, Finland, there's Ecofon. Ecofon is aiming to create complete recycled acoustic panels made with the porous and the lightweight geopolymers. CRH, they already have a big pilot plants in Netherlands. They have been making the geopolymer concrete elements already. And there are many universities and many other partners here, but I really see that we will solve the end of life of the mineral wools pretty soon. So the last estimate when we discussed was like in 3 to 5 years to come, we should solve this topic, but definitely we will. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you, Anne. Ma ei teagi, kas ma võib-olla lühidalt, ma küsisin tegelikult ühe Wool to Loop projekti kohta, mis oli seal esimeste slaidide peal mainitud, ja tegelikult see on selline üle-euroopalise rahastusega projekt, kus siis Saint-Gobain Soome on juhtrollis ja proovitakse leida lahendust mineraalvillajäätmetele, mida tekib siis 2,5 miljonit tonni, ja kus villajäätmed siis muundatakse geopolümeriks, mida saab siis kasutada toorainena või täiteainetena teistes ehitustoodetes, ehitusmaterjalides või toodetes. Et see on see projekt ja see on vist olnud väga-väga edukas, ma saan aru. Ja Soomes tehakse lähiajal siis Weberis esimesed tõelised katsetused toodetesse.